So the last time I was talking to you, I was talking about the cinemas and Billy Smart's circus. Well, we were very close. We had New Brighton on the doorstep. It was just a bus ride for us. Sunday afternoon we go to New Brighton. But in the 50s and earlier, it was a real holiday resort. People would come for a week's holiday to New Brighton, maybe 2 weeks, but I think most people only had a week off. So it had everything that a holiday resort would have. I mean, it had two fun fairs, an outdoor one on the old grounds of the old tower, because the base of the tower was still there. The metalwork had all gone after the First World War, but it was higher than Blackpool. And then they had an indoor fun fair near where the buses went from, right on the seafront. And we used to get the number 11 bus from the bottom of our road, and you'd go into New Brighton to the terminus, and you'd walk through a little park down to the seafront. Now that little park, they had a bandstand originally, and then that developed into and then they had a pavilion built, and that served cups of tea and that, and then it became like a little theatre, and it was called the Floral Pavilion. Now, there's still a floral pavilion there, but it's a new building. It's a different building from the old one. And the old one is the one, I'm going to think we used to go there. I'll tell you what, they had a summer season, right? And this bloke, Jackson Earl, he was the impresario. And he put these shows on, and his wife was a woman called Peggy Naylor. And she'd been a dancer, in the 30s, 40s, still hoofing like. And then they'd assembled a company, and they put the shows on. And they'd have 6 different shows, and it would change on a Thursday. So, if you were there for a week, you could go twice. Well, we went to all 6, because all we had to do was get on the bus and go. And oh man, they had Jackson Earl. I think he'd been a bit of a comedian and a crooner, and Peggy was a dancer. She was a bit statuesque by this time. And then they had Mavis White, and she was a nice singer, She'd sing anything, things that were in the charts or whatever. And they had a comedian called Jimmy Mack. Jimmy Mack. Well, there's only one of his jokes I can remember, really, I mean, there's some of those you couldn't really talk about them now, but this one I can remember. He said, it's my landlady's a very strange woman. He said, I went in the dining room, and there's a piece of haddock nailed to the door. And I said, Mrs. Evans, what's this haddock doing nailed to the door? And she said, that's for you to wipe your bread on. So that's the only one I can remember. But Jimmy Mack, and they had a jugglers and conjurer, and there were always a couple of tap dancing acts. And they were good, They were, but the highlight, a chorus line, right? So you'll have seen the Silhouettes with Billy Cotton's band and the Toppers at the London Palladium, because old what's her name became the Speaker of the House of Commons. She was a topper, wasn't she? Betty Boothroyd. She was a topper before she became an MP. So, and then of course the one in New York. I went to New York once, a long time ago, and I saw the Rockettes at Radio City, and there were about 50 of them, and they were like military precision, it's all this bounce, kick. Well, the Floral Pavilion, Melody, and they had their own chorus line, and they were called the Lido Lovelies. And they'd come on and do the bounce kick routine, but they'd start in the wings. So, the band, which was probably just an organ and drums, I think, I don't think I had much of a band, maybe a trumpet. And they'd start in the wings, and you could hear them, bang, bang, bang. They bounced up and down, waiting to bounce on. and then they'd bounce on, and the first one would come around the side and kick a leg. And then the next one, and it was very clever the way they did it. There were only 6 of them, And, oh, blimey. They weren't top notch, but they were all right. They were enthusiastic, and it was a laugh. But they were great shows. the floral pavilion. What did they have else there? They had they had some very exotic things there. They had pink pavements. I mean, if I'd have ever heard of Monaco, I'd have thought it was Monaco. Pink pavements, blimey. And there was the swimming pool. In fact, there was a swimming pool on the prom. And when It's a Knockout began, it was always done in swimming pools. So they'd go to Southport or they'd go to Bridlington or some seaside resort, and It's a Knockout always happened in the swimming pool. And they did it at New Brighton. And a group of us went to see it, and it was a good laugh. New Brighton, Lido. So It's a Knockout. Stuart Hall, Eddie Waring, all there, all of them. Arthur Ellis. Oh, it was a good laugh, And I like New Brighton, and I mean it's changed a lot now, It's nothing like it was, but yeah, we used to go there, and there used to be something which my grandmother remembered, something called the Ham and Egg Parade, and the Floral Pavilion was built that replaced the Ham and Egg Parade. Apparently, it was a bit notorious after dark, the Ham and Egg Parade. Well, people would come over from Liverpool on the boats for day trips because there was a on the pier at New Brighton, the ferry boat would come in from Liverpool. So and you could get there on the bus or the train, and it was very handy, So yeah, I liked New Brighton. We'd go on a Sunday afternoon, get the bus, and so the New Brighton, it's great. So I'll tell you about what other things did we do? It's because sometimes we'd go over to Liverpool. My dad's grandfather, he'd been at sea all his life, and my dad wanted to go to sea, but his mother, who'd experienced dad being at sea all his life, she wouldn't let him. She didn't want him to go. So he did the next best thing, After the war, he went into the army, obviously. So he worked at the shipyard. But I mean, in fact, I'll have to tell you about the shipyard next time because there's some interesting stories, especially launches. Launches were amazing, If you never saw a launch, especially a big one, it was pretty amazing, really. I mean, the yard, the ships were huge, These 7 slipways from the yard down into the river. If you had a ship on one of them, especially a big ship, it was immense. My brother's got a photograph on his wall taken from the top of Holt Hill in Higher Tranmere, looking down to the river. And the shipyard is in the foreground of the picture. And it's taken in about 1938, 39, something like that. And towering over everything is the Ark Royal. I mean, it's huge. And, it's on the slipway. Almost complete, So, yeah, the launches were always very exciting. And I went to quite a few when I was a kid. You'd sometimes get an afternoon off school. If the Queen or someone was coming to throw the champagne at the ship, you might get an afternoon off. So I'll tell you about that next time anyway. So all the best.